Hi, I'm Linda M. Brandt, and to continue the rest of my story, we ended the last time where our family had witnessed a first time miracle in healing. I was 13 years old, had developed spinal um, encephalitis, which is another word for sleeping sickness, which I contracted apparently from my grandparents' parakeet, and was in a coma and was miraculously healed by God. Was in bed for 3 months, but was able to continue in my studies that fall and continue to do well in my studies. So it was a total miracle, and we are so grateful. My cousins to this day have told me just recently, we are so grateful that we had the opportunity to pray for you, and we were so happy when you got out of the hospital. So that was the first time we witnessed a miracle. I want to tell you about the second time we witnessed a miracle. I was 17 by this time, and I don't know what possessed me. It was my birthday, and maybe I was trying to convince myself I wasn't getting old. And I was climbing our big old maple tree in the backyard. And to this day, I can still remember putting my right foot up and putting it on the branch and hearing it crack and my foot falling and me hitting each branch on the way down and landed on my chest on the big old root knot that was out of the ground from the tree, and it winded me, and I had no breath in me. And I remember my daddy's feet running towards me, and daddy would get very nervous and he would giggle when he would be nervous, which was kind of odd to me as his child, but that's what he would do. And he would always say, "Lenny, get up, you're fine." And as long as he thought we could get up, but at that point I didn't know if I was alive or dead, but I did eventually get up. And the next day had me all checked out, no broken bones, just bumps and bruises. But this is the miraculous part of that story, is at the same time I was climbing that tree in the backyard, and it was evening, it was starting to get pretty dark. There was a knock on our front door. Now, we lived at the edge of the city corporation line, and it was kind of a gentleman's farm. We didn't really farm it. My daddy rented out the grounds, and so it was a big property, I think about 13 acres. And we weren't used to people knocking on the door at nighttime. So my mother and sister were in the kitchen, and they went to the front door. And my mother said there was a raggedy, aged old man, and he said, "Oh, I'm so hungry. Do you have anything I can eat?" And my mother, of course, said, "Of course, we'll make you a sandwich." So she said, "Come on, Bonnie," that was my little sister, "come to the kitchen and help me." And so they ran to the kitchen, and when they came back with the sandwich, nobody was there. Nobody. They went down the road, they looked around everywhere, there was nobody. And my mother to this day still swears that that was a time, like was told in the Bible, that you never know when you're treating an angel unaware. And she believes that elderly old man in raggedy clothes was an angel. And because of my mother's graciousness and kindness towards him, that my life was spared that night. So that was when I was on my 17th birthday. So I started my senior year, 17 years old. And I was doing pretty good in school. I was doubling my credits. I was working really hard. And I worked at a little grocery store at the end of the road. And I got a full ride scholarship to Capital University, and things I thought were going pretty good for me. And then I met a boy. You know what happens when that happens? Well, he was tall, dark, and handsome. He had a souped-up car. He liked to dance too. And on my 18th birthday that August, instead of me entering the university, I decided to get married. And my parents told me I had to be 18. So on my 18th birthday, and then 6 weeks later, he and I found out that we were going to be parents. And so that meant in 9 months, we were going to have a baby. And so my life went topsy-turvy. Here I am, just a brand new teenager basically. And he and I lived at the end of a stone road outside a little community called St. Mary's. And we had bought a mobile home, and he worked 3 jobs. He worked for Goodyear, he worked for his father, he worked for his uncle and his grandfather farming. And so that meant I was there in that trailer alone almost every day and every night. And it was a different experience for me because I grew up with a big family and lots of kids all around and around people all the time, and here I'm suddenly alone, and I'm a kid, and I don't know how to talk to my friends who are now college students, and for Pete's sake, I didn't know how to talk to them because here I am going to be a mama too on top of it, and they didn't know what to say to me because we were on the same page. So I went into labor, like I was supposed to have Scotty like July 20th, my father's birthday. And I didn't go into labor till July 23rd. And we went to the hospital, and I was still in hard labor on the 25th. And my parents became frantic, and they rushed to the hospital early that morning. They begged the hospital to call the doctor and get her there. Well, they called her. She came, she broke my water, and Scotty was born. But because he was in the birth canal so long, he was blue. And they put him in an incubator with an oxygen mask. And brand new, hours old, he raised himself up, jerked that mask off, and the screaming never stopped for, I swear, almost a year and a half. I thought I would go crazy. If you can imagine, with a screaming baby, 18 years old, in a mobile home, at the end of a stone road. I'm not asking anybody to feel sorry for me. My parents just told me, you made your bed, now you can lie in it, you know? That was what parents told you back then. So later, that following year in the fall, then we moved the mobile home to Wapak, which was my hometown, and lived there. And at least I had my family around at this time, and Scotty had stopped screaming, but Scotty's dad worked for his father in construction and had quit Goodyear by this time and quit farming. And he ran a red light one night. and this was way back. And so he got pulled over and was fined $26 for the red light. And we didn't have $26, except that his uncle owed him $26 for baling hay earlier that year. So I had a silver dollar from my grandfather, and we went and put a dollar's worth of gas in the car. I think gas might have been like 25, 30 cents then a gallon. And we drove to his uncle's, got the money for doing the farming, paid his fine. And it was like, man, we were always robbing Peter to pay Paul. You know, have you ever felt like that? You know, so that was kind of our lives. And then because he was working for his father, we weren't always sure he was going to get a paycheck. Because his mother was sweet and she was kind and she was gracious, but his father was another story. And a bit of a shyster, and cheated business people, associates, and family, and didn't think much about it. And so we ate at their table a lot during that time. And one night, I had Scotty. This was before the screaming had stopped, and I had him in his carrier, and Scotty's dad walked in. He was washing his hands, getting ready for lunch, and Scott was, of course, screaming, and Rod took the towel and threw it over his face, and he just kept doing it. And every time he would do it, Scotty would kind of gasp, and then he would think it was really funny, and he kept doing it, and I pleaded with him to stop doing it, and he didn't. And so I grabbed his arm and said, please stop. And with that, he put his hands around my neck. This is the first time he'd ever done anything like this, and slammed me up against the wall. And his mother said, "Everybody sit down and eat and be quiet." And everybody sat down in silence and ate. That's what people did back then. And I didn't know at that time that there had been a period of abuse with his father and now my child's father. And that was something really hard for me to deal with, because in my family I grew up in a loving family, and yeah, they were disciplinarians, but it wasn't this craziness. And I found out my husband had had many broken bones that had never been tended to. And so there were some times that he tried different things with me, and it was very difficult. But then in 1970, my parents went to a Billy Springfield crusade, and my younger sisters, and my mother and father went down front, and they received Jesus into their hearts. And of course, every time I would go out to see them, they would talk to me about Jesus. And I thought I knew Jesus just fine. I really didn't want to hear what I called gibberish, And so by this time, then I found out that I had just gotten pregnant for our second child, Mikey. And Mikey was a big baby. And I started having some cramps a lot in my stomach and developing sickness even while I was pregnant. And then Mikey was not like Scott. When I went into labor, I made sure it was like a minute and a half apart. We drove. There again, we ran through the red lights, but fortunately, it was during the night. There was no traffic out. And so the nurses met me in the parking lot, took me right into the birthing room, and Mikey was born. He was 23 and a half inches long and 9.5 pounds. He was a big boy. Well, I thought maybe that's why I'd been sick all the time. He was in my ribs, and little did I know that it was going to persist, and I kept getting sicker and sicker. And in fact, my mother had a little gallery by then, and one of her clients came in one day, and they said, "Is that your daughter's work?" And my mother said yes, and she goes, "She's dying, And my mother was so upset. And finally went into the hospital, and they said that after the x-rays that my gallbladder had died, and it was black on the x-ray, and it was sending poison throughout my body, and that they were going to have to remove it. So I'd like to share with you another miracle, and it wasn't me that had anything to do with it. It was all about just asking for help from Jesus. And so I'll share that with you next time. But I hope that some of these things we've talked about are hard things, and families go through hard things, but I've learned that forgiveness can make anything work. And we are required to forgive. And I did find out that my father-in-law towards the end did totally and drastically change, and I'm so grateful for that. So bye-bye, and see you next time.